Okay. So with that, Narelle, could you please load up Lawrence and Rod's presentation, please, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for the introduction. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Lawrence DeBella. I'm the company manager of Herbert Cane Productivity Services in Ingham, and Rod Neilson will be joining me on the presentation today. This is a joint project. We'll be covering off today the Hinchinbrook Community Feral Pig Management Program. So there's a number of partners which I'll touch on, especially Hinchinbrook Shire Council, who manage that on behalf of all the partners. So today it's talking about innovation in space, and there's a little bit of a comic picture there of pigs in space. Next slide. So the program commenced in 2009, and it was to really assist the community to better manage feral pigs in the landscape under their control to reduce that environmental impact, social and economic impact of the various stakeholders in the Shire. So the program's been operating for quite a while. Next slide. So we had a meeting with all the project management partners to meet to discuss the issue. It was agreed that we could all work together. We set an objective, some key objectives, which we'll cover on the next slide, and to co-fund a full-time person who was currently employed with the Hinchinbrook Shire Council, taking responsibility for the coordination and management of the program on the day-to-day basis. And we defined the expectations for the investors in the community, how the program was going to run and operate. So this program's been going on now for 12 years. Next slide. So there's all our objectives, and that's a picture of our geographical area. Our landscape is surrounded by rainforest, World Heritage rainforest in the mountain area of the district, which is really the green areas on the map. The areas that you can see in white with the little blue dots is actually the cane lands in our area. There's around about 65,000 hectares of cane. And on the coast, we actually have the World Heritage Great Barrier Reef Lagoon. So we sit in a very environmentally sensitive area. Average rainfall for the township of Ingham is around about 2,200 mils. This year has been quite wet. We're already at 1,200 plus mils since January. So our objectives, you can see them listed there, but it's really to assist the landholders and work with them. So we need grower or landholder engagement and support to promote the benefits of the program through our various means, to undertake the control program through trapping, baiting and aerial shooting, and coordinating hunting where is required, to collect and maintain suitable information to understand how our program is operating and the impact, and we'll go through some of those a little bit later in the presentation. Also to provide a low-cost bait supply for our landholders to use, and we'll talk about that as we go along. We also want to continue to grow our program and have wider impact in adjacent areas to our Shire. Can we just click on the next? Yep. So you can see some of the GIS work that we do within our area. So we capture a lot of information geographically, and have an idea where things are actually happening in area, and we will capture information like baiting, shooting, trapping and other activities that we're doing across our landscape over time. Next slide. So from the cane side, and I manage this group, we have all our cane blocks mapped out, and annually we have a survey of our growers to estimate the crop damage that has been incurred due to feral pigs, and you can see that by the pink coloured areas. They're the farms that have been impacted in feral pigs in 2021. Next slide. So we have some very good data. We collect good data in the cane area, and we correlate that against the number of pigs controlled. So you can see, can we just click again? Yep. So you can see the number of pigs our program has been taking out over the number of years, but also the reported losses from the cane industry So on average, we're saving the industry. When we started in 2009, we're saving our cane industry around about $1 million annually in lost cane income. This does not take into account environmental or damages to sugarcane infrastructure or other industries' infrastructure. So just to the cane industry alone, we've actually got a $1 million return on investment from the investment that we've made over time. Next slide. So as I said earlier, we're located near the Great Barrier Reef, so we are the home of nesting flatback and green turtle populations along the coast. Next slide. And the feral pigs actually predate on these, so they actually destroy the eggs of the turtles, and so our programs work along some of these areas, and since our program has been operating, we've seen rises in the number of these pigs, these turtles coming back to their breeding grounds. Next slide. Along the coast, we have a large area of mangrove area, usually fairly inability to access that, especially at this time during the wet season, but you can see the impact on this particular wetlands along the coast where there was significant damage, and then you can have a look where we've had a major program activity taking out the pigs. You can see the benefit there, and we have natural regrowth of those systems. These systems, when they are damaged, create extra sediment loads going into the Great Barrier Reef lagoons, so we want to manage that as well from an environmental perspective. Next slide. We've also done some studies. We had some funding from Sugar Research Development Corporation a few years ago, which is now SRA, to undertake a study, and we did a genetic population study where we looked at the genetics of our feral pig populations, and we had some issues. We were targeting some areas, but we weren't getting any traction, so we did this study with Susan Fuller's group out at QUT, and we've really identified that there are two distinct populations. The population in the red is the northwestern group, and the population in the blue is the southeastern group. Interesting, the southeastern group are all, a lot of those pigs got genetics reverting back to European or Chinese breeds, and they are escapes that have, when we've had floods, have escaped from piggeries that provide food for people. So we have an interaction there. The red northwestern areas are pretty much the typical black, hairy, ugly-looking feral pigs that you typically see on a lot of the footage, whereas the coastal pigs can be multicoloured. Next slide. So on the previous one, we also have targeted those areas using genetic tests, using that genetic data. So we try to target those populations. We actively use 1080 in our program as a bait control, and pigs are omnivores, as most of you probably are aware. In the wet tropics, their diet's usually seasonal, and most areas look at using grain or meat. In the coast here, we tend not to have success using either of those, and we use tropical fruit baits. There's lots of wild guavas and mangoes and stuff like that out in the wild, so pigs have a sweet tooth for those. Over 4 months poisoned, we actually did a study over 4 months with Peter Camasco, and he's based at DAF, and he was based at our facilities here, and we looked at off-target impacts, and what we found that there was very little or no significant risk to other species with the use of 1080. So as I said, in the coast here, it's really tropical fruit baits is the effective way that we can get control of 1080, of feral pigs using 1080. Next slide. So some of our challenges, the changes to the Queensland Government supply and regulatory position in the use of 1080, including the use of baits. We've had to defend that, and those recent changes are going to have some implication on our program. We just don't have enough people on the ground, so one full-time equivalent is is good, but at times there's lots of activities and one person's not enough. So we need to get the engagement of the landholders to assist. Our person is really there to provide technical support, assist them where need be, get our bait supply. Our bait supplies are predominantly bananas, and the bananas come in from Tully, which is over 100 kilometres away from us. So David, our FTE, goes and collects them on a weekly basis, and we make them available to our landholders. We also collect mangoes, and we collect them from the packing sheds in North Queensland, mainly from the Burdekin, or source them locally, and we store them over the wet season period, because we've had 2 cyclones in the past where the banana industries have been taken out, and we haven't had access to bananas for over 7 to 8 months. So we stock mangoes in our freezers, and we've got a number of freezers where we freeze mangoes and keep them available over the cyclone season in case we need them. The other challenge is keeping growers and landholders interested in managing their expectation. In some cases, growers will get rid of the problem and think the problem's gone, and then problem comes back. So we need to manage those expectations and work with landholders consistently. Maintaining funds is probably one of our big challenges, and because our program has been around for a long time, governments tend not to fund us because we're established, but we do need to keep our funding secured long term, or else our program won't be able to operate. And probably one of our other big challenges is pig hunters, or let's call them pig chasers. They actually cost our program a lot of money and lost effort every year. There is a place for shooting. We're not saying that it shouldn't be considered, but we have them disrupting our baiting sites and dispersing the pigs, and subsequently lost effort from our side. Next slide. So what's to next? As a program, we've never really had a lot of funds to do innovative stuff and look at ways that we can take a risk and actually make investments into other technology. So we've recently secured some funding from the Queensland Feral Pig Initiative, and we've got some funding, and the project's called Project Squealer. Just go to the next click. Yep. So this particular project is operating in the Hinchinbrook Shire, so our area, and we've got a number of different things that we'll be looking at in this project, and we'll talk about some of them soon. But really investigating the use of thermal imagery to better access feral pigs, explore possible uses of drones, and development of AI technology to improve remote trapping activities. Yeah, next slide. So we've taken a slide out of Darren Marshall's presentation a few weeks ago, but as you can see, it's really important. If you don't have any control, you can see the pig numbers continually rise. You really need to be around that 75% or greater annual removal of pigs to maintain the effort that you've done. If you don't achieve that 75%, the numbers will then continue to rise again, and you're not achieving what you want to do. Next slide. Next, another click. Yep, so we'll get those figures back that we showed before, and you can see just one more click. So you can see in the highlighted areas between 2014 and 2020, unless we get those 75% effect, we're not having a major effect on the populations. Probably one of our biggest challenges where we are is the wet weather and getting access to our sites. In a year like this year, where we've had a very long, prolonged wet season, and access is near impossible to a lot of our farms and environmentally sensitive areas. So we then have rises in the number of populations, and then we have to work fairly hard for the next 2 years to bring those numbers down to get that 75% or better. So significant challenge in the wet tropics, and we're now looking at ways to manage that as a part of Project Squealer. Next slide. So I might hand over to Rod now, and I'll get Rod to explain these ones here. Rod's our drone pilot, and he's done a lot of this work. So I hand over to you, Rod.
Yeah, I hope everyone can see me. and hear me? This is work that we did. We had money as part of Project Squealer to hire a large drone with a thermal camera, and the idea was to go out and do pre-programmed flight runs and try and do pig counts. We worked out very early in the piece that just wasn't really going to work. So what we ended up doing is going out to areas that we have known pig problems and flying over them and seeing how effective the thermal camera would be at actually picking up the pigs, the image of the pigs. Are you able to play that again? This this is very low to the top of the cane. I was actually trying to see if I could get low enough to the top of the cane to actually spook the pigs in the cane. And what we figured out is it's almost impossible. I was flying about 10 meters above the cane, and I couldn't get the pigs to spook because the canopy of the cane was giving them so much security. But what it does allow us to do, if we know somewhere or someone's farm who has a pig problem, we can actually go out and at least assess the numbers of pigs up to a point that are inhabiting that that farm. This scene that you see here, this is one paddock. It's about four hectares of a 50 or 60 hectare farm, but there was only pigs in one block. We flew over the whole farm, and it was only this one block that had the pigs in it. So it does help us to actually work out where they are. This pig here that you can see, that's that big blodge in the middle that was there. So if we can move forward, next slide, please. So what we're doing, because the thermal camera wasn't as effective as what we'd hoped, we're now looking at we've purchased some GPS tracking collars. This is data that we've used for testing just to make sure they're working. We haven't actually deployed them yet. We're still waiting to be able to catch some pigs. It's been too wet and there's too much food growing for them naturally to come into the traps. So this is simply data that, for testing what is the error. There's three collars there. They're stationary, and that's the amount of error over a 24-hour period that we get just from these collars sitting in one place. So we're going to have to take that into account when we're working out how much they move. Next slide, please. This is the same collars. We had them attached to a few vehicles, and they drove around for a work day, so about 8 hours. So we were tracking our field staff as they drove around the district. Was quite interesting. But yeah, once we are able to catch some pigs, we'll put the collars on them, and then we'll be able to track them. And then, as you've seen in presentations by the likes of Darren Marshall, we'll be able to narrow down where the pigs are spending most of their time, and then we'll be able to target those areas more effectively with poisons and aerial shooting and things like that. Next slide, please. Narelle, do you want to talk about this, Lawrence?
You can do this one, Rod.
Well, this is potentially where we would be able to take drones. This area down along the coast there is
one more clip, Narelle.
This area down along the coast there is the Halifax Bay Wetlands National Park, and that's the area that we've been trying to do most of our work in, particularly with the drones. We wanted to do an aerial pig count before and after an aerial shoot, but we worked out it just wasn't going to work the way we'd hoped. So that's where we're hopefully going to put in the the GPS tracking collars and work out where the pigs are spending most of their time, and if there's significant difference between wet season and dry season. So
5 minutes left.
Next slide, please.
Yep, so I'll take it from here, Rod. Yeah, so what we're really trying to do is measure the number of pigs out there using drones and other technologies. Next slide. So we've actually done some drone work and, oops, yep, go back to that, where we've done some proof of concept work. And this is actually a drone that we've actually got a bag attached to it with some bait. At the moment, we don't have a permit to do aerial baiting using tropical fruit baits. So this is a proof of concept. We've used a hessian bag so we don't have plastics or anything to recover later. That bag is actually an open-ended bag, but we've got a special device on the end which you'll see, which will open and release the actual bag from the drone and deploys the actual bait. So long-term, what we're hoping to do is do pre-feeding in remote areas that we can't access, especially over the wet season when a lot of our activity can't occur. And you can go to the next slide. Hang on, no, just leave it there. So yeah, we'll go to those remote areas so that we can actually do the pre-feeding. We'll need to seek permits. At the moment, there is no permits in place. So as I said, proof of concept here to see if we will be able to in the future do either do the pre-feeding and maybe do the baiting in the future. We've deployed those bags onto sites, and we've had feral pigs actually take the actual mangoes or bananas out of those bags. Next slide. So the next interesting bit that we have is using artificial intelligence, and we've engaged James Cook University. This is actually some fish work that they're doing, looking at identifying fish in underwater systems. And you can see that the AI technology is identifying those. Next slide. So you can see in a system, it's actually identifying fish. So this group is actually now developing us some AI technology for feral pigs to identify a pig, identify a cassowary, an emu, or a person, and so that we can actually trigger our traps. Next slide. So this is the underwater camera, and you can see it's identifying the fish. Yep, next slide. And so our plan is to identify that there is a population outside, get them all in the trap, and then closes the gate. At the moment, this means normally a person would have to sit there day and night to actually release the gate. We're hoping that the AI technology will help us develop that, and so we're developing a proof of concept with James Cook Uni to develop this technology going forward. Next slide. So these are our partners. There's a number of partners, and we all contribute and we all work together. Hinchinbrook Shire Council has the full-time equivalent working with them, but HCPSL is us from Cane, but we've got the forestry industry have over 10,000 hectares in our valley as well, so they contribute. Queensland Government through their various programs, NRM programs, and national parks. Terrain NRM being our NRM group, the Catchment Land Care Group, Greening Australia, and Australian Government through the Reef Trust program currently fund our program in our region. Next slide. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, for that really interesting presentation.